I'm doing this presentation jointly with Famit, my colleague. I quickly take you through the main points. So we have worked over the years since 2009 on a model which we call the diamond model on generating demand for safely managed sanitation, working with businesses, constructing safely managed sanitation or rehabilitating safely managed sanitation. When people really want it and others can build it, financial institutions are coming in because by and large people are poor, and those who don't have toilets tend to be the poorer segments. And with financial institutions, microfinance mechanisms, they can get the means to construct or rehabilitate their sanitation systems. Working with governments on demand generation, on setting the enabling environment, policies, bylaws, etc., has been our forte. And we have been doing this for since 2009, building more than 1.6 million toilets. Now we're doing the same thing now in the circular economy, the sanitation circular economy. So we talk again about asset building, and the asset building can be on working with communities, can be on building toilets, rehabilitating toilets, or emptying toilets. Then the next part is when the toilets are being emptied, can be on-site, can be off-site. If it's off-site, then it's being taken somewhere, and then we're converting it into products. Our route so far has been to go into the compost, co-compost for agriculture, and then food production itself which is being grown there, eaten by humans, and you get the circular economy. So I think Michelle already talked about the country we are in. So in the 6 countries, we've done some, in total now, some 1.6 million sanitation systems safely managed. And we're doing one every 90 seconds. So on a daily basis, now coming to the finance, on a daily basis, locally, some 200 to 300,000 euros is being mobilized every day. That has been really our stronghold, but what you can see at the bottom is 11,000 tons of human waste reused annually. That's not yet in comparison to what we do on the sanitation construction side. It's not comparing that well. So this is really where we want to move into. So just the thing we do on toilets, that's really, as I said, that's our bread and butter, if you were. Take it like this, and we are in a very steep growth path, but we're also very conscious of the cost. And if you want to scale sanitation, which has always been an issue globally, costing is of importance. So when we say the cost of a toilet is the cost we as consortium partners, NGOs, or with banks, the cost we make in setting it up. It's not the cost of the toilet per se, because the cost of the toilet on average is 250 to 300 for a standalone safely managed sanitation system. Now I leave it now up to me, so he's going to talk about how we go from where we are today more into climate and the safely managed we're going to valorize that. Over to you, Philippe.
Yeah, thank you, Valentin. So I would like to start with climate finance, and then I will go deep into climate change mitigation and adaptation. So if we look at bigger picture at a global level, for example, the climate finance, it has really 4 main flows, which are biodiversity, desertification, climate change mitigation, adaptation. For today's session, we're gonna discuss the climate change mitigation adaptation part, connecting sanitation. So here I would like to have your attention on, so we have SDG 6 and SDG 13. They are generally looked at as a separate things, but there in a few cases nowadays we started considering them together to address both of the challenges. So in sanitation, we mainly consider, we compare open defecation with having a toilet. But when it comes to climate change, that comparison, it's not really helpful. So in that scenario, we remove open defecation because which has very least amount of let's say, greenhouse gases footprint. So when you would like to connect climate change and sanitation, it's the comparison between scenario 2 and 3, which I mentioned here, which is unimproved toilet and improved toilet, can give you a certain amount of savings in CO2 that can be varied based on different geographies, different types of system, and different climate conditions. Okay, so I would like to give you a quick examples of how you can look at your sanitation projects or circular economy programs or reuse programs, how they are linked to climate change mitigation in this slide. So you can compare solid waste, for example, solid waste dumping and treatment. Also similarly in terms of fecal sludge, illegal discharge, aerobic, anaerobic, and having a treatment and reuse. In that case, we are able to calculate the CO2 savings. Also, we are doing a study on co-compost application to agriculture. As Valentin mentioned about sanitation circular economy earlier. So our study with Indian Council of Agriculture and Soil Research suggested, they pointed out actually that having nutrients and carbons recycled from solid waste and fecal sludge can do various benefits to soil, for such as carbon sequestration, nutrient recovery, and also we found that it can also reduce your water use and chemical fertilizer requirement. And all these reductions can be converted or can be related to CO2 emissions, say. And again, eco-friendly material for toilet construction. For example, in Finnish Mondial, we do practice interlocking bricks, and we always figure out the way how we can reduce less cement, less traditional construction material, which has higher CO2 footprint. So by looking at locally available material or more eco-friendly materials in construction alone, we can save a lot of emissions. So now I would also focus on adaptation part. In adaptation, it's a little bit complicated when it comes to sanitation, but for example, having a flood-proof toilet, it is already way of an adaptation. So that is very proven thing already. So having a toilet which can last the impacts of, for example, flood or drought or any other climate change hazard. So that is already a way of adapting to the climate change. And again, making an optimal use and also reuse of the resources. It is applicable both in, for example, construction and also treatment and reuse part. As I said, in construction, we can definitely look at based on the local needs and their acceptance. For example, interlocking bricks, roofs from locally available material, higher plinth level in toilets. So these are quite good examples of climate change adaptation. And again, rising awareness and building enabling environment. Our further speaker will talk about it in detail. But for example, we also face by ourselves the challenge that people and many stakeholders they are willing to contribute to climate change, but then they ask what I can do as a household or as a stakeholder. So raising awareness and enabling environment plays a very key role into understanding the links between climate change and sanitation. And again, in last, the monitoring and evaluation. So again, this is considerably new topic that is connecting climate change to sanitation, and especially when it comes to mitigation and adaptation, things are a little bit more complex. And again, on top of that, if we manage to get climate finance into sanitation, in that scenario, we need to do rigorous monitoring, and that monitoring is generally long term, not even 10 years or beyond that. So we need to continuously improve our monitoring framework, which can capture different types of data, and it will allow to evaluate those data and make some changes in coming future. As a Finnish Mondial program, we are committed to work towards the connecting sanitation to climate finance and climate change. So we are already working on generating more credibility and evidence about all those things I talked about. And for example, comparing the situations of having unimproved or traditional toilets with improved and safely managed system. It could be either on-site or off-site. What are the greenhouse gas saving potential on that? Working towards improving the monitoring framework. And yeah, so these are the list of activities that we are focusing on Finnish Mondial. And now I'd like to stop and go back to moderator. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much to both Valentin and Sumit. It was very interesting hearing about Finnish Mondial in both parts. It was great to see the circular economy approach you take and the solid figures, financial data on your real impacts, which really show that what you're doing does have an impact on the target group and the environment. And for Sumit's part, also super interesting to see, for example, the thoughts on the baseline. To what do we compare the sanitation systems? Interesting to hear that the sanitation system itself can be adaptation in some cases. And thank you for highlighting the necessity for monitoring and evaluation, and also for adding some ideas on the concrete way forward, which I think is just what we need. And just as a reminder to everybody, as Michaela said, if you have questions, please feel free to already write them down in the chat, and we will, or I will then let you know after the next presentation, and we can join questions about this part and the next part by the Container-Based Sanitation Alliance. So now we have our next presentation, as I said, Container-Based Sanitation Alliance by Remy Kaup, who is the Executive Director, and who was also very kindly introduced already by Michaela. So there's not so much for me to say. He will now show us about how container-based sanitation and how it can contribute to mitigation and adaptation specifically. All right, so Remy, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me and you can see the slides all good. Thanks. So I'm Remy, the Executive Director of the CBSA. I will present on behalf of the CBSA, but that has been prepared together with my colleague Madeleine, who has been leading on this work in the Alliance. And I'm relying a lot on the expertise and experience of a lot of colleagues across the CBS Alliance. Some of them are here today, so it will hopefully help in the Q&A after. Right, so what I want to talk about today is, well, a bit of a background on sanitation and carbon emissions, what we know at this point. A brief intro to container-based sanitation. I think most people are familiar with it by now because the FSMA has been running a webinar on it, but a bit of a reminder. And then the links were found with carbon emissions, and especially our work to find out, well, can we use carbon credits as a source of finance for CBS and for sanitation more generally? So the reason I'm interested in this is because there's not that much that's been said about sanitation on climate. This publication on the screen has been released a couple of months ago. It's really good. really, really good. I really encourage people to take a look at it. It's a very good overview of what is happening between sanitation, especially urban sanitation, on climate change. It's got a lot of concrete examples. Because usually what I see is this kind of report. This is very good too, but it's called water, and then it says, oh, it's all about wastewater actually. But if you look at the detail of that, then what they actually say is that the water sector emissions, carbon emissions, come 2/3 from sanitation, and of this, about half is sewage, wastewater, and half is non-sewer sanitation. So you think, well, there's quite a lot to do on this then. It's not the water sector emissions, it's sanitation sector emissions. And there's been a study a couple of years ago, well, actually no, earlier this year, on the global methane emissions from non-sewer sanitation. So just the methane is quite a lot. Non-sewer sanitation is about 5% of global methane emissions made by humans. It's about the same level as wastewater treatment plants. And if we manage to eliminate open defecation, which I really hope we will manage, it will add even more. So there is a lot to do. And admittedly, there is a lot to do in rich countries with the wastewater treatment plants, the water, non-revenue water there, and about emissions generally. So admittedly, a lot of focus should be there. But as we want to improve sanitation everywhere, we can think also, what can we do it in a way that doesn't increase emissions too much, or that can even reduce them? There's been an interesting paper in Kampala to show where do emissions come from. So typically in the sanitation chain, you would have carbon emissions coming from the containment, the pits and the septic tanks. There is anaerobic digestion happening in there, and that produces nitrous oxide, N2O, on methane, CH4. Transport produces emissions like diesel engines of the trucks. And in treatment, you again have emissions coming largely from anaerobic digestion, but also from the electricity that you need to use, for example. So you want to quantify this because you think, well, if you want to reduce anaerobic digestion, then you have to empty the pits regularly, but then your trucks will emit more carbon dioxide. What's the trade-off? So there's been a study in Kampala. It was showing a few interesting things. The big shocker is that it was saying that about half of Kampala's emissions come from non-sewer sanitation. Half. If you have been to Kampala, you have been in traffic. You have spent hours in traffic. Yes, like in many cities. It's hard to imagine that all these vehicles idling are producing much less carbon emissions than pits and septic tanks, but on treatments. But actually, that seems to be the case. It's astonishing. So I can't make a presentation without having a sheet flow diagram. So here is one for Kampala. It's from that study that was done. So to be clear, I haven't been involved in this at all. That's largely from the Cactus Research Project, and they've done amazing work on this. And you see a few circles on this sheet flow diagram. The black circles are direct emissions. So poo and sludge producing emissions directly. Green circles are operational emissions. So the energy that you use, for example, for treatments. On gray, all the trucks. And on gray is the embodied emissions that come from constructing something. And the first thing that comes that you can see is that the green circles are barely visible. It's almost impossible to see the emissions coming from the emptying trucks or from the electricity on this. What really matters are the big black circles. And a lot happens in containment, in pits and septic tanks that are not very often emptied, not emptied at all, that you have a lot there. And also a lot in treatment because some of the treatment is anaerobic and produces methane or nitrous oxide. I'm simplifying largely, but roughly this is what we can get from this. So what can we do? Well, we have to improve treatments, and that's something that's known already, using more aerobic methods like composting or capturing the biogas that is produced there. But also, if we look at the containment, what we can do is take away shit quickly. So, and if possible, keep it dry, which means sewerage is not too bad actually, because that takes everything away more quickly. But of course, that's not an option in many places. So what remains in terms of options are scheduled emptying, frequent emptying, really, and container-based sanitation. So today I want to present container-based sanitation. I'm not saying that's the only option at all, but it is one of the options to minimize carbon emissions. So container-based sanitation, as a recap, if you weren't at the FSMA webinar a few months ago, and if you haven't watched it on YouTube since then, how dare you? Container-based sanitation is a service where you have a toilet above a small container, and that container is removable and is typically removed every week or twice a week so that it contains the waste hygienically. They tend to be waterless. They tend to use either some sealable film or some additional material to prevent any smell, and users pay a small fee for using them, but typically very low or no upfront cost. On this, here are the members of the Container-Based Sanitation Alliance, members and affiliates. So some of them have been doing this work for almost 15 years, most for about 10 years, and in a few different continents. What I like about CBS, so I started working with the CBS Alliance 6 months ago, but I've been a CBS fan for a longer time. And there's a few things that I like. And two are very relevant today for climate adaptation. I will not dwell too much on adaptation today, but to know they use much less water, which is useful in water-stressed areas, so here in Peru. And because you can just take them and transport them when there's a flood or other events, then you can take them away and they don't contaminate the environment. They don't leak like a septic tank or a pit that's not well sealed would do. They can also produce interesting products typically, and they can be used in home, which is very well suited for informal settlements. And amongst the products that are used, many of them can reduce emissions as well. So producing and capturing the biogas to make electricity or heat, producing charcoal that can be used as a different source of heat for cooking, compost or soil conditioner, which helps with soil restoration, and black slaughter fly larvae, which help to produce protein and replace feedstock. So we wanted to quantify a little bit, how much does CBS reduce carbon emissions? So first, a few years ago, we did a study of 4 CBS operators. And what we found is that they typically reduced emissions compared to the usual systems in use in their respective cities, so pits or septic tanks with infrequent emptying. And the emission reduction was about 80 to 210 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per person per year. It depends on the processes that are used for treatment. It depends on a lot of factors, so it's often hard to compare, but that's roughly the range. So the total, these 4 CBS operators were doing emission reductions of 45,000 tons of CO2 equivalent per year. Now that's hard to visualize, so that's what 1 ton is. So a typical car used over a year or year to in a small apartment with electrical heating, for example. So that's 45,000 times this, for example. It's not yet in the millions of tons that are being produced by sanitation globally, but it's making a dent in it. What it found, confirming what is in the Kampala study, is that the transport emissions are negligible compared to the reductions in methane and nitrous oxide. So transporting more often was negligible. And there's additional emission reductions when producing energy or restoring soil. So the next step from this is, okay, that's nice. It's something we should do. Can that benefit from climate finance then, or specifically from carbon credits? So we were looking at, we've done a feasibility study on this. As a quick recap on carbon credits, I have discovered this wonderful world, in the last 6 months. So again, I have been relying on the expertise and experience of my colleagues on this. So I have been, I'm sharing how I've discovered that. Carbon credits is when you are a company that has hard to abate CO2 emissions. So you try and compensate this, and you do this by buying the credits generated by a project that actually reduces emissions, because they do green energy, because they protect land, etc. So as they do this good project that reduces emissions, this is independently verified. It produces 1 carbon credit. 1 carbon credit is the removal of 1 ton of CO2 equivalent, and the other company can buy that. If you're cynical, you can say that this is a way for polluting companies to continue polluting. So it's definitely not a perfect system. But you can also see it as a way to fund organizations and projects that actually reduce emissions. That's the interesting side for us. So can it contribute to the sanitation sector? So we've done a feasibility study that looked at 5 operators, and what's complicated is calculating it. How do you calculate that? So your emission reductions, these tons of CO2 removed, are baseline emissions minus project emissions. Baseline is what would happen normally. The typical assumption is that you have septic tanks and pits and irregular emptying on demand, which is not that often. On project emissions, which is what happens with your project, in this case CBS. So shorter containment, transport often, on different treatment methods. What this feasibility study has said is that, is it feasible to use carbon credits for us? Yes, with a huge asterisk. I mean, this asterisk should be much bigger than this. It was one of the highest fonts I could find. It was showing that there's potentially high revenue, actually. If using our current scale projections, then it's getting close to $1 million in a few years' time. So potentially it does make a big difference. But there's a lot of costs to recover. And these come from the registry fees. So for validating your data, getting it verified, designing your project in the first place, the fees associated with issuing the carbon credits themselves. It didn't even include the monitoring costs, because these are changed for each organization. So do you have to actually measure the emissions or not? And there's so many methodologies that you would need to apply to at the moment. It's very complex. And another limiting factor is that based on current market prices for carbon credits, CBS operators would have to increase the scale every year significantly. Now, the thing is, we want to use carbon credits to scale up, but this was telling us, well, you need to scale up to use carbon credits. Oh, come on, catch-22. So we want to make it viable now. So to make it viable, what we need to do is to increase the income potential. So one thing is that there is ongoing research to establish what are the real baseline emissions. The Kampala study has shown that the emissions from non-sewage sanitation are higher than expected, and there is a project ongoing at the moment to measure it in more locations called SCARE. So it's a research consortium, and it's doing it in a few cities, and it's showing higher baseline emissions, but also a lot of variability. So this may influence official figures. CBS operators can use treatment options that increase emission reductions, like heat generation. They can scale up, but we need to find ways to do this. And something we are doing now is to create a new methodology for carbon credits that will do a few things. So importantly, it will take into account emissions in the containment, because that's not usually taken into account by methodologies. What we want this methodology to do is also to hopefully help us use proxy indicators, so that you don't have to measure actual flow of methane in every toilet, but you can use a proxy for this. Take into account emission reductions in containment and transport, not just the treatment. Grouping together several treatment processes and maybe including new one like black solar fly larvae, and reduce the complexity. And hopefully we can take into account this updated baseline. Hopefully we can make this viable for smaller scale CBS operators. And at the end, what we hope to do is that this can benefit other non-sewage sanitation services, not just CBS, but we're not sure yet it's possible. It may be possible with a revision later, it may be possible from the start, but we have to assess that. So we're just at the beginning of this new methodology creation. So there you go. We can answer more questions in the comments if you're keen, but that's what we've been looking at so far. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Remy. This was very impressive. You covered the whole cycle, starting from the global level, going to what you are doing, assessing many parts and perspectives of it, and then going back to the global level. And this in just I don't know, 10 minutes. So really, really interesting presentation. So I think we have a first question here, and I don't know how to pronounce your name, S. Kumar. If you want, please just unmute yourself and share your question with us.
Hello, this is Rajkumar here, and I raised the question, are there specific auditors for measuring the carbon credits in sanitation? Because I've heard about auditors who are doing regular assessing of carbon credits in what do you call the Clean Development Mechanism projects or the CERs. But I don't know whether our carbon credits in sanitation comes under VER, voluntary emission reduction, and are there specific auditors for that? Thank you.
Just to jump in, as Amy reminded me, we also now have two more speakers who might answer questions. One is Madeleine Edgeworth, who is who's coordinator at the Container-Based Sanitation Alliance, and also Haroon Dawood from Synergy, which is one of the member organizations.
But, I mean, maybe I can start with and then colleagues can add. But so, to my knowledge, the carbon credits haven't been used by non-sewage sanitation yet. So the way carbon credits have been used for sanitation is for anaerobic digestion, so biogas capture coming from sewerage. And I think quite a lot of biodigesters in China as well, which I think are fed by manure, possibly human excreta as well. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. But to my knowledge, it hasn't yet been used by non-sewage sanitation. So there's people who have experience of developing methodologies and who are in that sector. But yeah, we have to look a bit more into who can audit, etc. Unless Madeleine or Haroon, you know better on this.
I'm not sure the auditors. I know you mentioned CDM. So if you're referring to also the carbon standards bodies, then yeah, this is something that they would accept. So they would be happy to look at carbon credits for container-based sanitation and other forms of non-sewage sanitation. I don't know if that answered the question.
All right, thank you. Any more questions? Just also, if you didn't write it in the chat, please just go ahead and ask your questions. Of course, also to our colleagues, Sumit and Valentin.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I have a question for you, Remy. I enjoyed your presentation, really very nice. I'm just, I don't know whether I should play the devil's advocate, but if you do a climate adaptation, right, in a flood-proof area, you do container-based sanitation. So you are working on climate adaptation part, right? You make sure that, but then you can also still collect the carbon credits on the entire chain. Are you not going to collect them twice then, or how do you see that? Or is this a hypothetical question? It's, of course, hasn't arisen yet, but would this be something to consider later on?
I didn't understand the question, sorry. If you're doing it in flood-proof areas, then what?
You have climate adaptation, which would entitle you to some carbon credits, right? That's from climate adaptation. You also go to carbon credits on the CDM mechanism. No, I'm also a little confused on which one is which one. But then from the whole service chain, you would be entitled to carbon credits as well, right? So how do these two, the adaptation part and the mitigation part, how do they relate in your view?
I didn't know you could get credits for adaptation. So I think I also got the question from Valentin that I think adaptation is more related to carbon finance maybe not specifically, as he said, for carbon credits, because in carbon credits, you look at CO2, right? It's CO2 equivalent savings. So, so I think Valentin's question was, so in your work, do you also capture carbon finance in general to build up, let's say, to contribute towards the adaptation, or as I said, having this flood-proof toilet which you can move empty soon. So have you what is your experience in getting, for example, carbon finance into climate change adaptation side, especially looking at non-sewer sanitation?
I think it's needed. We need more climate finance for sanitation. That should be a good way. I think we should. My feeling is that there is a lack of evidence at the moment in the sector as to what constitutes climate resilient sanitation in practice. What do you do? Because I see a lot of examples of a lot of people saying, well, better services improve resilience. Okay, but what do these look like? So they can continue functioning when there's a flood. Okay, what does that look like? And I think we're starting to know that some systems are improve resilience, but I'm not aware of that much evidence on it. And again, there's interest. I think the SCARE research project is also looking at it. How do you qualify and quantify the benefits of this? But yeah, I think as a sector, we have to do better at engaging climate finance funds and so on.
Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. So now more and more questions are coming in. I think the first I saw was from Dirk-Xi Feng. So please, if you want, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, this is Jessie from China. I'm just curious. Are you also doing like biogas generation from the CBS? You have big projects you have been doing, because we know that for biogas generation, there are very mature methodology for carbon credit. So yeah, just curious. Thanks.
Yes, I mean, biogas generation is the main way to get carbon credits in sanitation at the moment. And it's definitely something to consider. So that's one of the pathways to reducing carbon emissions in the sector, is to retrofit wastewater treatment plants to capture biogas methane coming from it. Then some types of sludge or excreta lends itself well to biogas generation, especially if it's dry and a bit more stabilized. But if it's fresh excreta, usually it doesn't work so well, or it needs to be mixed with other things, some slurry, etc. That's my understanding anyway. So yeah, it's definitely something to consider, but that's not always possible in practice. And then what we're showing is that a lot of emissions come from earlier in the pits on septic tanks, and there it's much harder to capture biogas. You can have home biodigesters, but you do have leakage from this. They're expensive to install, etc. So it's not always possible either. Yeah. Martin, should we go about some of the questions in the chat directly, or do you want to ask them? What do you prefer?
I think it's also interesting if they can read it. So I think for Traoré was the next one, was a very technical question and a very specific question. So you want to read? Can you hear me? I was kicked out for some reason.
We can hear you again now.
Great, you can hear me. So if the person did not read the question, just go ahead. I think I cannot see the chat right now. I think it was about mixing lines, yes, and pit latrine.
They asked, is there an inconvenience in receiving shower and toilet water in the same pit?
Any reaction to that?
Okay.
So question addressed to Remy or to us?
Yeah, I mean, we can answer from a from what the research has been showing is that if you got more wet content in pits, typically there's more emissions from what we've seen so far because of more anaerobic digestion. If it's dry, there's less, but it's not that clear cut. So what I know is that research at the moment from the SCARE project, for example, is trying to establish this. What makes a difference? Groundwater level, what goes in the pit, etc. And that's very hard to assess, but definitely it's good to keep an eye out for this research. And I think maybe the FSMA could maybe organize a webinar with the researchers so that we understand a bit better directly from them, because I'm only quoting what others have done at this point.
Great. So sorry, I was kicked out. Now I'm back in, but I cannot see the chat messages anymore.
Okay.
So as you just suggested, Remy, maybe it's better to just read through it, because I remember it was many questions and more were coming in. So just feel free to get through them, and I can prepare the final statement.
Okay, so we can see Anurag was asking, are all on-site toilets significant contributors of greenhouse gases? Again, from the research, is those that are not emptied very often, where the contents can stay for a long time. So the question is how long, and I don't have the answer to this. And your second question was how CBS doesn't contribute to emission as it requires collection and transport more frequently. So it does, there are operational emissions with emptying, with CBS, but the CO2 that comes from tailpipe of the trucks produces much less greenhouse gas contribution than methane. Methane, is it 300 times more potent than CO2, something like this? So methane and nitrous oxide warm up the planet a lot more than CO2, which is why the emissions from the trucks, even if they come every week or twice a week, are negligible compared to what comes out of the pits. So that's been the big shocker, on something we need to be very conscious of the sector. Sarah Hennessy was asking how frequently do pits need to be emptied in order to significantly reduce emissions. That's a very big question, and I don't think there is an answer yet in the sector. It will be interesting because the new methodology will depend on this to be applicable to wider non-soil sanitation. So I don't think there is an answer yet, but I would love to hear if there has been research in this recently. I know that researchers from Leeds, from UTS have been looking at it along with others. Then there's Daniel Diba, who was asking, besides carbon credits, could you say more about financing from the Green Climate Funds? Or are there actors within CBSA or others that have accessed GCF funding for sanitation work? I don't know. I would love to personally, but maybe Haroon knows better. If so, yeah, please write in the chat box and so on. But I know there's been discussions, but no direct funding as far as I know. Yeah, unless Madeleine or Haroon, you know better. Or Sumit and Valentin, I don't know whether you've been engaging with them either.
Yeah, maybe I can add a very short note on that. So when we look at a carbon finance, it's very broad thing, and let's say, and carbon credits, it's something within that which doesn't represent everything. So carbon credit, it's a separate methodology. It involves a lot of mathematical calculations, and it works based on how much emissions you save actually. So there is a plus minus comparison, baseline data, and it's rigorous monitoring. So that was, I think, Remy, he's currently doing. But there is other angle. For example, if we just an easy example, if you look at the COP 27 or previous COPs, there is always commitment of 100 billion, 50 billion, this $1 billion commitment. So there is this carbon finance is very popular way, but there is also money is very specifically available from countries. And in my presentation, I said there are 4 flows on top. Those flows are created by OECD, and all the countries, most of the countries are part of OECD. For example, more Western countries, I would say. So they report OECD so how they deliver to those commitments in those 4 sections. So, for example, the governments, they have their development finance. So that they would like to utilize in climate change mitigation or adaptation. And within that, if we have methodology or if you know we will contribute to either climate change adaptation or mitigation through sanitation. In that case, you can also get this kind of grant support or development finance support. So that is also a big chunk. And this carbon credit is more of a revenue generation stream. Yeah, I would say. So there are both sides about getting the grants or a different way of financing, and the carbon credit, it's more of a CO2 emission reduction. Yeah, I think, yeah, or maybe, of course, Remy, if you would like to add on that side, or maybe Valentin. Okay.
No, well, I will add on this. So Brian Reed is asking, the finances look marginal at the moment. How much could people's bills be reduced by if the CBS providers got carbon credits? 0. So the thing is, CBS providers charge users what users can afford, and that's a very small portion of the total costs. So CBS providers tend to make money, but through selling products, through other ventures that cross-subsidized CBS, and by gradually increasing their scale and realizing efficiencies. But that leaves a finance gap. And the finance gap is real. As long as you want to deliver full chain sanitation safely to low-income people, you will have a big finance gap. It's the nature of sanitation. But what we can see is that there are new revenue sources that can help plug some of that gap. On carbon credits can be one. You say that it looks marginal. It's true, but that's why we're working hard on increasing the income that comes from this, on reducing the cost associated. So, yeah, I think this is an effort over the next few years to get there. But yeah, we're optimistic. Astrid was mentioning that another established route for carbon credits is co-composting of organic waste with fecal sludge. Indeed, yes. So this that's one of the recognized methodologies. So I was looking at the existing methodologies cover wastewater, which is not always applicable to fecal sludge, unfortunately. Composting, co-composting, biogas recovery, heat generation, and briquette production. So that's the main things that are recognized on this. Black soldier fly larvae is under development at the moment. So that's what exists roughly in the sector. I think that's been all the questions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for taking over this time. Great job.
So
you can moderate the next session. So yeah, and I think we're also almost through. So I will just share with you my main points from this discussion. So I'm actually not a sanitation guy, but I'm very impressed. I was actually involved in the study which you, Remy, shared in your first slide, because they used a tool which was programmed by us. But it's great to hear that so much is already going on in the sanitation and climate mitigation and adaptation, with examples from both Finish Mondial and CBSA. And it was interesting to hear that, or to learn that 2/3 of these water emissions are actually sanitation or wastewater emissions. I knew that, but I never questioned it. For me, it was always part of water, everything. So it's great to hear about that. And it was really interesting to see how ready sanitation is for carbon credits. I think you said.
Oh, was he kicked out again?
It looks like it, yeah. Oh no.
Oh, I think we lost Martin again.
Same happened again. Sorry. It's when I'm switching between OneNote and to read my my notes and here the Zoom that happens. So I will just switch to Zoom once again and not switch back again until I'm done. Yeah, it's impressive to hear how ready sanitation is already for carbon credits. And thanks for Finish Mondial for adding the adaptation side again and again, because that's what the climate negotiators tell us, and what we need to do is to look at both sides, right? Mitigation and adaptation at the same time. And in many cases, as Sumit said, sanitation is already a resilience to climate change, or already improves it. If, for example, the area is flood prone, and it might become more flood prone due to the impact of climate change. Well, and thank you so much for both organizations for pointing out steps forward and next steps and way forward. For example, by Sumit, and for highlighting the need for M&E, because that, I believe, is something which often water and wastewater people get wrong, that we keep doing our thing, but we have to report to the climate community how we contribute to mitigation and adaptation. And I think both of you have great ideas to do that. And also great to have suggesting adjustments for the carbon credit methodology by CVSA. What I hope is that at COP28 in Dubai, some of these elements might be discussed in the negotiation circle, as it's already always moving forward the discussion. And I hope that sanitation, on-site sanitation, container-based sanitation will be more visible at the climate arena. All right, so these are my thoughts, and so I'm heading back to Michaela for some final words.
Yes, thank you, everyone. What an insightful webinar this has been. I've learned so much. Yeah, thank you, everyone, for coming, for participating, for asking questions, for being engaged in this topic as well. It's really great to see that. Yes, that's all my words. Just very, very grateful. Thank you. I don't think we're going to have another FSMA Spotlights webinar in December. So we will see you all in the new year, 2023, in January for our next Spotlight session. So I guess I wish you all a very happy new year, happy holidays. Don't work too hard, spend time with your loved ones, spend time with yourself, take care of yourself. It's been a rough couple of years. So FSMA really wishes you a lovely holiday season, whatever you're doing. Thank you so much for your participation in these webinars. It's webinars like this that make us excited to keep going. You know, and it's lovely to see the networking that's happening in the chat box, emails being exchanged. Like, this is what it's all about. So again, thank you, Martin, for being a lovely moderator. Thank you, Remy, Madeline, Valentine, Sumit, and for your amazing contributions. Yeah, hope you all have a lovely day, night, afternoon, wherever you are. And we can officially close the webinar right now.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.